Kitco Mining special coverage of the Rural Symposium, Natural Resource Investing, is brought to you by G Mining Ventures.
Learning from history has proven to be a successful exploration strategy for Orania Gold, which has embarked on expedition unknowns in the search for the precious metal. The company has done it again, and to tell us all is gold exploration's very own Josh Gates, Dr. Keith Barron. Keith, welcome to Kitco.
That's quite an introduction.
Orania is known for its Lost Cities project in Ecuador, based on the search you did in the General Archive of the Indies in Spain, looking for the centers of gold production for the conquistadors 500 years ago. Now you seem to have turned to Asterix the Gaul, having announced a gold exploration project in France in search of the source of Celtic gold. Tell me more.
Well, it's a very interesting thing. Back last November, at the Natural History Museum in Paris, a very large gold specimen went on display for the first time. It weighs 3.5 kilos and it has 1 kilo of gold in it, which is an incredible grade of gold. And I became aware of it. And, you know, it has a little tag on it that says where it comes from. And I knew that historically, well, as far as I was aware and looking through the literature, there was no mention of gold being found there before. So I was very, very intrigued by it. One of my colleagues contacted the staff at the museum, and they said, actually, we have some old documentation. There's an old reference from a newspaper in 1875 that talks about a couple of gentlemen who were building a road, and they were actually pulling rocks out of a hedgerow to fill in some holes in this road, and one of them was extraordinarily heavy, and they cracked it open and it was full of gold. So they supplied us with that, and also another excerpt from a book that was by the chap who first explored the very famous cave paintings at Lascaux, the prehistoric cave paintings that a lot of people know about. He had examined these specimens 50 years on from when they were discovered, and I've got a piece here which I think was found at about the same time historically. It comes from it's not mine, unfortunately, but I borrowed it from a collector, and so it's a historic specimen, and this one contains 1 pound of gold. So it's quite an astonishing piece. It's actually 46% gold, 460,000 grams per ton. And look, you know, when you find out something like this and you're a geologist, you get very, very excited. So my company, Orania, we've filed for the mineral rights over this area. And we'll see what transpires from that. But very exciting.
That's quite amazing, Keith. And this rock specimen you've got here, it's got a quartz vein with gold, very high-grade gold, obviously, all through it. It looks pretty amazing.
Yes. Well, you know, I'm a real history buff, and actually, it's a very interesting point. Julius Caesar, who we all know about, he wrote a book called the Gallic Wars. And this actually goes back to the comic strip Asterix the Gaul. The Romans, of course, invaded Gaul, led by Julius Caesar. And when Caesar returned to Rome, famously crossed the Rubicon, he had his own army. He was very, very wealthy at that point. And where did the wealth come from? And I believe that there was a source of gold in Gaul that we really don't know about historically, or many sources, and you know, he essentially plundered it, and that's what financed his armies and his eventual attack on Rome and becoming the dictator and all the rest of it.
And then invading Great Britain, or what was Britain at the time. Okay, for the gold projects in Ecuador, you did an extensive amount of research in the historical archive. Is there more of that sort of research that is possible to do to further your investigations in France?
Potentially so, yes. And you know, we haven't even scratched the surface, really. There could be stuff in the Vatican. We just don't know at this point. But when we, one of our people examined the site, found some quartz sticking up out of the ground. No visible gold on the surface, but evidence of old workings, which are potentially pre-Roman. Time will tell.
Okay, so you've applied for some concessions. What's the plan there, assuming you're able to be awarded those?
Well, we'll see. We'll see. It's a little bit of a black box in France, and there's a lot of bureaucracy. It's going to take some time, but certainly we'll work with the authorities. And I expect there's a lot more than this. There's never been any technology thrown at this, so who knows what's actually in the ground. Gold is all gold is considered property of the state in France, so you have to have a lease of some sort, license to extract it, and we'll work within the law and work with the authorities and move this thing ahead.
Okay, is France a country where you believe it's possible to bring a gold mine into production?
Well, actually, I'm sure that you're aware, but France has various departments around the world, and places like New Caledonia, Vanuatu are considered to be French territories. French Guiana, for instance, and of course there's lots of gold mines in French Guiana. So the law in French Guiana is the same as the law in France, the country, right? And we know there is one active concession right now. There is a foreign company that's exploring gold for gold in France, and there's also a very, very big project for lithium going on. So the country is not anti-mining. It has a long, long history of mining, of course, of things like coal and iron ore and even uranium. And everywhere needs jobs, of course.
Absolutely. France is part of the European Union, of course, and the European Union has very advanced, is advancing a sort of critical minerals plan. Presumably, France is very keen on that as well. So if you do have the potential for critical minerals on the areas where you're looking at, such as lithium or others, presumably that would be a positive.
Yeah. Well, one of the critical metals is antimony, and antimony is used on a small scale in circuitry and things like that. There is no source of antimony in the whole of the EU, so it's all imported right now. And then there are other metals like, for instance, let's say nickel. 55% of nickel is imported from Russia, and the Russians are talking about cutting off the supply. So what's going to happen? For manufacturers of stainless steel, car parts, all that kind of stuff, right? So there's a real push on right now in Europe to become self-sufficient in critical metals, and it covers things like battery metals and other things, other commodities as well. They just don't want to be beholden to China, beholden to Russia, to these other countries. Macron has actually announced a 500 million euro fund to fund battery metals within France. So, and they've just built a gigafactory up in Dunkirk, up on the coast, the famous Dunkirk. They're very, very committed to this.
Okay, well, let's cross the ocean now. Let's get an update on the Lost Cities project in Ecuador.
Yes, well, as you're aware, there's going to be a national election next month. Our projects are very advanced. We've been working at this stuff for 6 years now. We've spent over $80 million on the exploration. And we've got to the stage now where we need to have a partner. So we've been talking with, pretty much all the major companies in the world. But there's a couple of front runners. I believe that they're waiting to see what happens with the election coming up. But nevertheless, for instance, we have copper, silver, and sediments extending over 22 kilometers. Now, just think, in the early days, if you went to the copper belt and staked up 22 kilometers of the copper belt in Zambia, what would you do with it, right? You're a little company. Do you have the money to go and do the exploration? Of course not. You're going to have to bring in a partner who has obviously the wherewithal financially, but also the expertise to find the things and then bring them into production. That's where we are, not just on the copper and sediments, the shale and the sandstone hosted stuff, but also porphyry copper. In the last AGM that we had last month, it's a little bit of a story, and I won't bore you with all the details, but originally I applied for 400,000 hectares, not the 200,000 which we presently have. And the other 200,000 were placed by the government in what they called the reserved areas, and they said we could get them in a year's time, a year and a half's time, or something like that. That was later cancelled. But in the interim, thinking we were going to get it, we flew an airborne survey over the whole thing for radiometrics and for MAG. We got over 200 porphyry-type targets. And unfortunately, a lot of those targets are outside of the present concessions. I'm working very, very hard to see that we can get those things restored to the company. And then we'll really be cooking with gas because, everybody needs porphyry copper.
Excellent. Okay, well, let's sort of finish up with getting back to the history aspect. When we spoke a year ago,
Sure.
You just announced the discovery of what you believe was one of the lost cities. How's the search for the lost cities going?
Well, that one lost city is an alluvial area, and it's actually just outside of our concessions, and that's unfortunate. It's owned by a construction company. I've talked to the owner. At one point, they had 50 invading excavators on the property, Colombians who were mining illegally. They were all driven off by the government, and a lot of their machines were actually torched by the army. And that's a good thing. Now, the second one, which is called Sevilla de Oro, we think that that's in that 200,000 hectares, which is just outside of our present concessions. We've been to the area, and over an area of about 2-3 hectares, every little stream you can pan gold out of it. So that's very exciting. I need to get that land.
Okay. Well, I wish you the best of luck with that. Dr. Keith Barron, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Stay tuned to Kitco Mining for more from the Rural Symposium in Boca Raton, Florida.
Kitco Mining's special coverage of the Rural Symposium, Natural Resource Investing, is brought to you by G Mining Ventures.